Hello, my name is Julian Laurelio, and this is an Immigrant Snapshot, the story of Giovanna Breda Kubota, a 20-year-old Brazilian international student whom I had the pleasure of interviewing this semester. Throughout this presentation, I would like to highlight the need to view migration on a multiple level of analysis, including the individual and the collective, and to highlight that migration is a complex, dynamic, and not unilateral experience, with many hardships that go alongside the positive aspects of migration. Giovanna Breda Kubota migrated to the Orlando Kissimmee area in 2015 in order to pursue a higher education. She is from San Bernardo do Campo in the interior of Sao Paulo State, Brazil. She comes from a family of multi-generational migrants, with her grandparents being from Japan and Italy, a factor that influenced her choice to migrate. In terms of goals and life direction, she is striving to be a journalist and would like to participate in humanitarian assistance. Her biggest goal is to one day go to Egypt and see the Great Pyramids of Giza and potentially set up some humanitarian assistance programs in the North African coast. In order to understand the forces at play in terms of Brazilian migration, it is important to put the sending nation into context. The nation of 210 million people has a complex history, known for its corrupt politics and overabundance of natural resources. In terms of migration, it is imperative that we view Brazilian migration streams on a general level of analysis. Push factors include recent economic hardships, notably the 2008 recession, increased violence, and lack of opportunity. Most Brazilians come due to tourist reasons, business travel, or for temporary work. The migrationpolicy.org mentions the yo-yo effect created by Brazilian immigrants. Since the 1980s, Brazilians have been coming on tourist visas, overstaying until their money ran out, to then go back to Brazil and run the same game over again, thus creating migration networks and pathways. During her interview, Giovanna stated, "We don't know who to trust, basically. That's why we come here," alluding to the lack of government efficiency and legitimacy as a strong push factor out of Brazil. In terms of academic research, I've used two scholarly articles, one by Carolina Almeida and one by Patricia Busato, both of whom study Brazilian immigrant reception in Florida. For them, push factors out of Brazil included security and inflation, and the pull factors into Florida included affordability and cultural proximity. They spoke at length of Brazilian impact into the Latinization process, saying that it adds an extra layer of complexity to Florida's immigrant environment. They also brought up the notion of invisible minority, originally coined by UF professor Maxime Marjoli, stating that due to language and cultural differences, Brazilians encompass the space of an invisible minority within the larger pan-ethnic Latinx community of Florida. However, on a local level, such as in the Brazilian enclaves of Orlando or in towns in the Northeast near Boston, Brazilian immigrant communities do have an economic and social impact on the society around them. In order to better understand the general patterns of Brazilian migration, I have gathered here three charts, one from Carolina Almeida's research and two from migrationpolicy.org. Graph 6 shows the employment status of Brazilians in the United States, relating that the majority of Brazilians are either employed or not in the labor force. Figure 3 shows the population density of Brazilians in the United States, and as previously mentioned, there are large communities in central and southern Florida and in the northeast around the Boston metropolitan area. Figure 6 shows the immigration pathways of Brazilians in comparison to other migrants in the United States, and shows that the majority of Brazilians enter the United States because they are immediate relatives of U.S. citizens or because of employment-based preferences. As Giovanna related in her interview, Brazilians heavily influence Orlando's landscape. One can find Brazilian restaurants, Brazilian bakeries, Brazilian products, and if anyone ever goes to Disney World, you can see millions of Brazilians as tourists. When discussing immigrant context of reception, institutional relations can provide both challenges or opportunities. In our conversation, Giovanna mentioned her relationship with public education, law enforcement, the judiciary, and the business sector. Giovanna is extremely thankful for all the resources and opportunities the University of Florida has offered. It is thanks to their scholarships that she is able to afford the high cost of tuition, and it is through the Latin American Center that she also found an internship with Ashe USA, a Brazilian newspaper. Alongside the concepts brought up in Aranda et al.'s book, Making a Life in Multi-Ethnic Miami, perceived upward social mobility due to educational attainment is common among immigrants. They found, however, that perception does not always result in actual returns on education. However, I believe that Giovanna's experience will bring concrete results as she is attending one of the top 10 universities in the United States. In the immigrant context of reception, institutional relations can also provide grievances. Throughout Giovanna's conversation, she mentioned her two largest hurdles: tuition and liminal legality in terms of employment. For international students, tuition can cost 3 times the price, and they cannot qualify for in-state tuition even though they've resided in the state of Florida. Under her F1 visa, Giovanna is only allowed to work on school campus, heavily reducing the amount of work and money that she could potentially do. Immigrants are often faced with bureaucratic hurdles, exemplified by Giovanna's need for a CPT authorization in order to even find a volunteer opportunity or accept an internship position. In terms of law enforcement, Giovanna also mentioned a potential fear that she feels because the police force in the United States is heavily armed, and she did mention the Latino threat narrative. The challenges faced by Giovanna were not unique, with nearly 1 million international students in the United States facing the same high cost of tuition that she does. This news story, published by Business Insider in September of 2016, shows just that. The economic impact of international students on the American public school system is massive, where they contribute nearly $9 billion a year. Being only 12% of the student population, these international students contribute 28% of the annual tuition revenue. Which goes to show why Giovanna stated that I don't think it is fair that we pay so much. Another crucial component of the immigrant context of reception is the social relations that people face once they arrive in a new destination. Giovanna's initial migration was facilitated by a friend of her father's who helped her and her family establish themselves in the Orlando area. However, in a short period of time, this friend stole all their money and fled the Orlando area, creating a high sense of Brazilian disillusionment within Giovanna, who felt as if she could not trust her fellow Brazilians in the area. The resulting ontological insecurities, such as homesickness and loneliness, were alleviated by other social networks that she made through school, specifically within international communities and the international centers both at Valencia College and at the University of Florida. In their book Living Illegal, the authors offer a good example of multicultural incorporation alleviating ontological insecurities. The Roy Thomas Church in Georgia offered multicultural sermons in order to bridge cultural gaps between community members. Similarly, the international environment which Giovanna found herself in provided this sense of community and created new friendships, which in turn alleviated her ontological insecurities. Migration undoubtedly has an impact on people's identity formation, especially in the context of Florida. Florida's Latinization process includes people from numerous national origins, different generations, and of varying socioeconomic and racial factors. As Bussadzo states, Brazilians must be seen as Portuguese-speaking Latin Americans, culturally different than the Hispanics, but also Latin Americans, both feeding into this notion of inclusion and exclusion. The self-identification of Brazilians as either Hispanic or Latinx really depends on the individual and on the level of their national pride. For Giovanna, she had a strong sense of national identity, never mentioning pan-ethnic labels she encountered here in Florida. She also states, "I like to say that no one is Brazilian," alluding to the concept of racial miscegenation and to the high immigrant population of Brazil. Part of an immigrant's struggle in this process of identity formation is navigating different notions of racial classifications. Racial classification in the United States has historically followed a simplistic white-black dichotomy, exemplified by the one-drop rule. For Latin American immigrants, this creates an ambiguous space in terms of their identity. They may be perceived as white passing or be racially profiled for having dark complexion. In Brazil, ethnic groups are much more relevant than racial groupings, with 4 main races that lead to a number of different classifications. Due to the lack of a dichotomy, racial identification tends to be less stark and socially perceivable. Giovanna finds herself in a racial limbo, being perceived as white until she spoke and revealed her accent. Race perceptions definitely impact immigrant incorporation and social mobility, with trends showing that the darker Latin American immigrants face more hurdles in their incorporation experience. To conclude, Giovanna's story is an example of successful immigrant incorporation. Her perceived social mobility has increased, feeling as if her dreams of becoming a journalist and traveling to Egypt are more attainable. However, the interview also related feelings of anguish, hardship, and negative effects of being an outsider. Migration is not easy, and is fundamentally a human endeavor, which will always include ups and downs. Her story falls in line with larger Brazilian migration patterns in terms of push and pull factors, but I believe her case is also particular. Through her academic achievements and persistence, Giovanna has opened a world of opportunity for herself. I am excited to see what the future holds in store for her. Thank you.